back to the booth one final time for the base. Have the Reaper positioned correctly. I had to do some sanding and working with the base. I put a little bit too much of the base material on when I was adding some more to get a rougher surface area. But everything is fixed now. I even got the gravestone in, and we're going to airbrush on the colors. You would think I would want to leave like this off while I'm doing the base. However, I do actually want some of that color growing onto the tree and the gravestone, especially when we get to the greens, which we're doing now. Rather than doing a smooth coat of colors, I'm actually blotching it on, so we have some different texture in the dirt. As I said, a little brown and a little green. So using some Minotaur Muddy Brown, and now I got, once again, sewage water, the same that we used on the tree. And I'm going with the Badger because their paints tend to be a little bit more on the thin side. And so it's not going to be completely opaque. Now I probably should have done the green first, but that's okay because I can go back and do the brown once again and just alternate between the two. And then I'll get a little bit on the tree, on the base, and a little bit on the gravestone, and it'll be fine. That's kind of where I want the mold anyway, near the solid objects. I'm finding a whole lot of properly named colors out of the Minotaur range here. Right now using Swamp Ground, just to green up a few more spots of the base. Really build up that wet ground effect. And I did want to mention that I used some of the Ghost Tint Brown to darken a few areas of the base, and then I actually started doing a little bit on the tree as well, because the tree was looking a bit too samey, if I can use that word. I wanted a bit more variation in it, and ideally if it had pieces of bark that I could paint differently from pieces where there was bark stripped off, it would work. But I just kind of did little spots here and there of a darker brown, and it made the whole tree much more interesting. Just adding, some darker color, more brown color in the recesses, and a little bit on the base, so it looks like the base of the tree, the trunk of the tree is wet, more wet down there, and it really just punched things up. And I just wanted to mention that real quick because that was like a quick idea. It took 30 seconds, and suddenly I'm liking the tree a whole lot better just with that small amount of color on it. So FYI, more colors usually is better. I'm going to try not to overdo this green, and then we're going to go back to the desk. Now we come to the point of adding various vegetation, and I'm using product I used before. This is, I always forget what type of moss this is. I know it's not Spanish moss, I'm pretty sure, or peat moss. It's a type of moss. You could find it at like Michael's, or there's some aftermarket sellers that sell it. Anyway, it's kind of cool. It has a nice, really good fern look to it, or you can just break off a few of the strands and use it as various alien vegetation. And I used it on my ATST a while back, last year or so, and it worked really well. However, I realized after about a year, it dried out and looks very, very bad now. So this time, I've soaked all of this in a mixture of glycerin. It's 1 part glycerin, 2 part water. I just put it into a cup and let it soak for a few days, pulled it out, dried it on paper towels, and theoretically, the glycerin is supposed to get absorbed into all the little plant fibers, and then it replaces the water, and then it doesn't dry out. At least that is the theory, and I hope it's going to work. If you hear me complaining about this thing not looking as good, about a year from now, you'll know it hasn't. And I'm just applying a few little strands here and there, Trying to find decent spots to put it, realistic spots where, you know, more moisture will be collecting. And also trying to cover up any little boo-boos as I find them. Just a little drop of super glue, and hopefully it will stay in place. There we go. So I'm almost done with this part. Just one or two more strands. I don't want to overdo it. I can always go back and add more if needed. And then we'll go on to the second and maybe the third part. Not sure how much we're going to add right now. Getting close to being done here. Added a little bit of ivy here and there and there. That is from Army Painter, and it's called Ivy. Really don't like it. It just has a odd, unnatural look to it, but I didn't have anything else, and I thought I'd try it. I never used it on such a large scale. But anyway, last thing I want to do here is put on some leaf litter, and I have this stuff, which is a natural product. I always forget what tree it comes from. I had one of these in my neighborhood when I was a kid. Wish I saved the things I used to pull off and tear up from it. It's kind of a willow type tree. Drooping branches, has these little cone things hanging from it that you can pull apart, and has all these little leaf shaped bits in it. And leaf litter is always a pain to apply because it's very delicate, and usually most people apply it by putting glue on and sprinkling it on, but you end up with like patches of it, and it's not very realistic. So I've been fiddling around with new ways to apply it, and I came up with this, which was pretty effective. All I have here is a slurry of the leaf litter mixed with some, quite a large amount actually, of acrylic varnish, and just a small amount of white glue. I actually don't know, I don't think the white glue may not even be necessary, because once the varnish dries, it should glue itself, the leaf litter, into place. But what this allows me to do is to kind of just pick up a little slurry with a leaf on it or two and place it pretty much wherever I want. And I'm trying to pick out the larger leaves in the set here, so I have something a bit closer to the scale of our 1/9 scale death. And because I'm using the matte medium, all the gloss you see right here should dry matte, so I don't have to worry about coating this. And also, since the gloss is absorbing into the leaf, I don't have to worry about the leaf being very delicate and perhaps breaking off at a later date. So I think we're almost done here. And looky there, we are completely done with Death from Discworld, or the Moebius models, Grim Reaper, what have you. So yeah, we're finally done, and came out looking pretty decent. I kind of like it. Adding the extra touch of the death really helped bring out some of the details. Just extending out that chin a little bit and making the eyebrows a bit bigger, I think it added a much more evil look to him. Especially the eyes, those little discs of styrene really helped to make things pop. I think the scythe blade, people brought it up. I know I say it wrong, but because of my nerve damage on my face, it's a very hard word for me to say. Scythe blade. There you go. I hope you're happy. I like how the wood came out on it. The hourglass, of course, that sucked. That was the worst thing in this kit. Definitely look at replacing it, for your own build. I would highly suggest it. And this hourglass does work. So the sand does move in it. Very nice. And for the robe, see, already getting dust particles. That's where I'm wearing the glove. And the robe is fairly simple, as I showed you how to paint that. I have him removable because basically just for transportation purposes, because this is going to go back to Moebius for a convention or two. And just because the way the blade hangs off the edge, I want to be able to wrap it up in two separate sections. The base itself, I haven't gone over that yet. The only addition I made off camera from what you saw was I realized the leaves were looking a little bit too light in color. They were a dead leaf color, but not for the environment I put them on. They were too light, and this was supposed to be, I wanted a very wet looking base, so I really actually needed more of a dark brown rotted leaf. So I very lightly airbrushed on some of the Badger Militaire brown ghost tint on them to darken them up a little bit. And then I did give everything a flat varnish on it because it was still looking a little bit too shiny. But that came out fairly decent after all the effort. I like the Mort letters on it. And one thing I think I still need to go back and do is I painted up the holes in black, and now it's very hard to see them to line this guy back up and get him back on the base. So I'm gonna have to go back and paint those white just so to make it a little bit easier. But one other thing I want to mention, a couple improvements if you want to make on your own. Yes, the leaves are in the wrong scale. They are much too small. I did consider getting laser cut leaves of a larger scale, or using like a leaf punch that you can get from a craft store to make larger leaves. However, I didn't want to wait another week or so to get those items. I already waited long enough to finish this, waiting for the letter issue and also drying the moss stuff in the glycerin. So it was already a lot of waiting going on. I didn't want to do any more. Also, you can add a few leaves to the tree you want. If I had a larger leaf, I probably would have done that. So also maybe you want to add a few extra branches, wire you can use, and then work in the texture using some epoxy putty. If I did that, that would make it more ideal if you added leaves, if you had some thinner branches, because obviously you don't have the leaves directly attached to a large branch on a tree. It's the small ones as they come out. And finally, one thing I'll mention real quick here, I know I'm rambling a lot. Positioning on a diorama. Normally you want the main focus of the diorama in the center, but you can put it off to the side as long as you balance it out properly. If the tree and the gravestone was not here, having the Reaper front and to the left would look very odd because he's just off center essentially. But since we visually have it balanced with the tree and the gravestone, everything actually ends up looking center, even though our Grim Reaper is to the front and to the left. So it makes it a little bit more dynamic, but it still has balance to it. So that's one little thing I wanted to mention real quick to keep in mind when you're building your dioramas. So I will shut up now. Photos at the end, some better photos of this guy. And hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.
Time for go to bed.